What if everything you've ever been told about God was a lie? Not a lie born of malice, not a conspiracy whispered in shadowed halls, but a lie so ancient, so woven into the fabric of civilization that we mistake it for truth itself. A lie that lives in the architecture of our churches, in the prayers we learned as children, in the silent pleading we offer to the empty sky when no one is watching. You've felt it, haven't you? That quiet suspicion, the unanswered questions that accumulate like dust in the corners of faith. You kneel, you pray, you ask, and the ceiling remains a ceiling, the sky remains sky. And somewhere deep inside, beneath the guilt of doubting, beneath the fear of blasphemy, a question pulses. Is anyone listening? The pews are heavy with silence, not the silence of peace, but the silence of absence. Candles flicker against stone walls, casting shadows that dance like ghosts of devotion. Millions of voices rise each day toward heaven, bargaining, begging, pleading with a God they've been taught sits somewhere above the clouds, keeping score, choosing favorites, answering some while ignoring others. And in that waiting, in that terrible uncertainty, something breaks. But here is the truth they never told you. God was never silent. You were looking in the wrong direction. The divine didn't abandon you. You abandoned the divine by searching for it everywhere except where it actually dwells. The greatest lie about God is not that he doesn't exist. It's that he exists out there, separate, distant, watching from beyond the stars with the temperament of a monarch and the moods of a man. This lie has shaped empires. It has built cathedrals and toppled kingdoms. It has comforted millions and condemned millions more. It has turned the infinite into the finite, the eternal into the temporal, and the very essence of existence into a personality. But one who saw through it. Emmet Fox, a visionary whose words cut through centuries of confusion like light through fog, declared a truth so radical, so dangerous to the architecture of organized belief, that most chose to ignore it rather than face its implications. God is not a person. God is principle. Not a man with moods, not a father with favorites, not a judge weighing sins on cosmic scales. God is the infinite intelligence behind all creation, the law that governs existence itself. Impersonal, yes, but not cold, never cold. For this principle is love in its purest form, consistent, unwavering, mathematical in its perfection. Think of gravity. It doesn't ask your religion before it holds you to the earth. It doesn't punish the wicked by making them fall harder or reward the righteous by letting them float. It simply is. Reliable, predictable, universal. It responds to mass and proximity, not to prayer or petition. So it is with God. The God of principle doesn't play favorites because principle cannot be partial. It doesn't answer some prayers and ignore others because law doesn't negotiate, it operates. It doesn't demand worship because principle requires no validation. It simply expresses itself through every atom, every breath, every moment of existence. And here is where the lie collapses and truth emerges from the rubble. You cannot bribe principle. You cannot flatter it or fear it into compliance. But you can align with it. You can understand its nature and cooperate with its movement. You can recognize that what you've been calling answered prayer was never about convincing a distant deity to intervene. It was about bringing your consciousness into harmony with the law that never stops working. If this resonates with something deep inside you, something that stirs like recognition rather than revelation, like remembering rather than learning, don't let it fade into the noise of your day. This isn't just another video to consume and forget. This is an invitation to awaken. Leave your reflection below, not for me, not for the algorithm, but for yourself, and for the others who will find their way here, searching as you once searched. Speak the truth that your soul already knows, because every authentic word you write becomes a beacon for someone still wandering in the darkness of the lie. Truth doesn't just liberate the one who speaks it, it multiplies, it spreads, it awakens. Share this with someone who needs to hear it, not to convert them, but to remind them of what they've always known but were afraid to believe. Now, let's go deeper.
The human mind needs form. We cannot grasp the infinite directly, so we shape it into something we can hold. We give it faces, names, personalities. We make the formless fit into our language, our stories, our desperate need to understand. This isn't wrong. It's inevitable. It's human. The ancient peoples looked at the sun and called it a god. They watched the storms and personified the thunder. They felt the force of nature and gave it character, angry when it destroyed, pleased when it provided. The gods of old were mirrors of the human ego, jealous, vengeful, lustful, proud. They loved and they hated. They blessed and they cursed. They were everything we were, but amplified, immortal, infinite in power, if not in wisdom, and so the pattern was set. When Moses came down from the mountain, the people couldn't wait. They couldn't sit with the formless, the invisible, the unnameable, so they melted their gold and fashioned a calf, something they could see, touch, worship, something that looked like power. But here's what we forget. The golden calf never went away. We just refined it. We made it more sophisticated. We dressed it in theology and called it orthodoxy. We wrapped it in scripture and called it revelation. We built institutions around it and called it tradition. We kept trying to make God manageable, understandable, controllable. And in our need for control, we created a tyrant. Picture a priest, old now, his robes heavy with the weight of decades. He stands in an empty chapel at dawn before the congregants arrive. He's mouthed the liturgy 10,000 times. He's promised divine mercy and threatened divine wrath. He's baptized babies and buried the beloved. He's held the hands of the dying and whispered assurances of heaven. And in this moment, alone with the altar, he kneels, not out of habit, out of exhaustion, and he prays, not the formal prayers, but the raw one. Are you there? Have I been lying? Have I been lied to? The silence that follows is not the silence of absence. It's the silence of something too vast to speak in words, too intimate to be distant, too present to be out there. A child asks her mother, "Where is God?" The mother points to the sky, up there watching us. The child looks up, sees clouds, sees blue, sees nothing that looks back. And in that moment, a fracture forms, the first crack in the foundation of a lie. Because if God is up there, then I am down here. If God is watching, then I am watched. If God judges, then I am judged. And the distance between divinity and humanity becomes infinite. But this was never the teaching of the great mystics. This was never the message of those who actually touched the divine. Jesus stood before the crowds and said, "The kingdom of God is within you." Not above, not beyond, not in some distant heaven you must die to reach. Within. He didn't point to the temple and say, "There is God." He pointed to the heart and said, "Here is God." He didn't teach people to beg and bargain with a cosmic authority. He taught them to recognize the presence that was already there, already operating, already complete. And what did humanity do with this revelation? We turned it back into separation. We made Jesus the only Son of God, so the rest of us could remain orphans. We made his divinity unique, so ours could remain dormant. We worshipped the messenger and forgot the message. We recreated the very God image he came to destroy. And here, is the plot twist, the turn in the story that changes everything. The false god was never out there. It was never a being in another realm plotting our destinies and testing our faith. The false god was the projection of the human mind, trying to control what it couldn't comprehend. We created God in our image, judgmental because we judge, wrathful because we harbor rage, conditional in love because our love is conditional. We made God small enough to fit in our doctrines, predictable enough to fit in our scriptures, human enough to be manipulated by our rituals. And then we called this idol holy. We bowed to our own reflection and called it worship. But the true God never moved, never changed, never diminished. It remained exactly what it always was, the principle behind all existence, the intelligence animating every atom, the law that never breaks and never bends, not because it is rigid, but because it is complete. And now we must let the false image die. We must shatter the idol we built, not with violence, but with understanding. We must see it for what it was, a bridge we needed until we were ready to walk on water.
Listen carefully now, because what comes next will either free you or frighten you, depending on how tightly you still cling to the lie. Emmet Fox, speaking with the clarity of one who had pierced the veil, said this: God is the only presence and the only power, and operates by law. Not by whim, not by mood, not by favoritism or fury, by law. Now the word law might sound cold to you, mechanical, impersonal. You might hear it and think of courtrooms and police, rules and restrictions. But Fox meant something else entirely. He meant that God is reliable, consistent, unchanging, that the divine operates according to its own nature, which is love, not emotional love, not conditional love, but principled love, structural love, love as the fabric of reality itself. Think of mathematics. 2 plus 2 will always equal 4. Not because mathematics is strict or authoritarian, but because that's the nature of mathematics. It's not negotiable. It's not personal. It simply is. And when you understand the principle, you can use it. You can build bridges that don't collapse. You can calculate trajectories that hit their mark. You can create technology, art, civilization itself, all because you've aligned with a law that never changes. Now, apply that to God. God, the principle behind creation, operates with the same consistency, the same reliability, the same absolute fidelity to its nature. And what is that nature? Love, intelligence, life, truth, wholeness. These aren't poetic metaphors, they're the substance of divine law. When you align your consciousness with love, love flows through you, not because you earned it, but because that's how the principle works. When you align with intelligence, wisdom emerges, not because you're special, but because intelligence is always present, always available, always expressing itself through those who open to it. When you recognize life as the essence of your being, health follows, not through miracles that violate nature, but through the natural operation of the life principle, restoring what fear and ignorance disrupted. This God cannot be bribed. You can't trade good behavior for blessings. You can't negotiate with ritual or flatter with praise. You can't threaten God with your disappointment or manipulate God with your desperation. Because God is not a person listening to your words. God is the principle responding to your consciousness. Here's the difference, and it's everything. The false God, the one we invented, hears your prayers and decides whether to grant them. Maybe yes, maybe no, maybe later. You never know.
You're at the mercy of a cosmic mood, a divine lottery, a mystery wrapped in sovereignty. But the God of principle doesn't decide anything. It expresses. It manifests whatever consciousness is held before it. You don't convince it, you embody the truth you seek. You don't beg for health, you recognize the life principle that is already your essence. You don't plead for abundance, you align with the infinite substance that fills all space. You don't pray to God, you pray from the God nature within you, claiming what is already yours by divine inheritance. Gravity doesn't punish you when you fall. It doesn't judge you, condemn you, or withhold its power because you didn't worship it correctly. It just is. And when you work with it, when you understand its nature and build accordingly, you can create flying machines that soar. You can engineer towers that stand. You can harness the very force that once seemed like limitation into the foundation of achievement. So it is with God. The God of principle never punishes, never condemns, never withholds, but it responds perfectly, precisely, mathematically to the consciousness you bring to it. If you approach the divine from fear, you experience fear's manifestation. If you approach from lack, you experience lack's reflection. If you approach from separation, you experience the evidence of separation. But if you approach from love, if you recognize the presence within you as the same presence that fills the universe, then love becomes your experience, your reality, your life. This isn't magic, it's law. And law is more reliable than magic could ever be, because magic requires belief. But law operates whether you believe in it or not. You just get to choose whether you align with it consciously or unconsciously. And that choice, that is where your freedom lives.
Now we must confront what this means for everything we've built on the foundation of the lie. If God is principle and not personality, then what happens to guilt? What happens to sin? What happens to the entire architecture of shame, punishment, and divine retribution that has governed human consciousness for millennia? It collapses. Every ounce of suffering you carried in the name of God, every moment you felt unworthy, unclean, unforgiven, was built on a misunderstanding. Not on truth, on ignorance. Ignorance of divine law. You believed you had offended a deity who now withheld love until you performed the right rituals, said the right words, suffered enough to prove your remorse. But principle doesn't withhold. You simply stepped out of alignment with it and experienced the natural consequence. This is the second great revelation. There is no devil, there is only ignorance of law. The enemy you feared was never an external force. It was the absence of understanding, the darkness that results when you turn away from light, not because light abandons you, but because you've closed your eyes. Evil is not a power opposing God. It's the shadow cast by humanity's refusal to recognize what it already is. Sin is not an offense against a divine ego. It's a mistake, a missing of the mark, a misalignment with principle that produces suffering not as punishment, but as consequence. And here is the mercy hidden in this truth. If sin is ignorance, then salvation is understanding. You don't need to be rescued from divine wrath. You need to be awakened to divine nature. You don't need forgiveness from an offended God. You need recognition of the God that was never offended, never separated, never absent. Look at the world built on the false God image. Millions praying for miracles while believing they're unworthy to receive them.
Societies constructing elaborate systems of punishment in the name of justice, mirroring the cosmic court they imagine in heaven. Religions dividing humanity into saved and damned, righteous and wicked, chosen and forsaken, all because they serve a God of preference, a God of partiality, a God who is fundamentally human in his limitations. And beneath it all, the quiet despair. The woman who prays every night for her child's healing, and when the child dies, believes she wasn't faithful enough. The man who loses everything and concludes that God is testing him, punishing him, or has simply stopped listening. The countless souls who feel unseen by heaven, invisible to the very presence they were told watches over them. This isn't spirituality. This is trauma. Trauma inflicted by a God image that was never real to begin with. But here, in the rubble of the false god's temple, something true can finally emerge. When the idol shatters, the presence is revealed. When the personality dissolves, the principle remains. And you discover that you were never praying to something distant. You were communing with the very essence of your own being. Let the false god die. Not with rage, but with gratitude, because it served its purpose. It was the training wheels on the bicycle of faith, necessary until you learn to balance on truth itself. Let it die, and in its death, be born.
Close your eyes for a moment, not to pray to something above you, but to feel what is already here. There is a presence closer to you than your breath, nearer than your heartbeat, more intimate than thought itself. It is not watching you. It is you, the truest part of you, the part that existed before your name, before your story, before the world told you who you were supposed to be. This presence doesn't judge your mistakes because it knows that what you call mistakes are just movements in the dance of becoming. It doesn't withhold love because withholding is impossible for that which is love. It doesn't demand worship because it needs nothing from you. It is simply eternally giving itself as you. Emmet Fox saw this. He declared it with the force of revelation. There is no power but God. You are never separated from the divine mind except in belief. Except in belief. Not in reality, not in truth, not in the fundamental nature of existence, only in belief. Which means every moment you felt alone, you weren't. Every moment you felt powerless, you weren't. Every moment you felt unworthy, unloved, unseen, you weren't. You were simply believing a lie. God is the intelligence thinking through you right now, the awareness reading these words, the curiosity that drove you to seek answers, the doubt that questioned the stories you inherited, the longing for truth that wouldn't be silenced by comfortable lies. That is God, moving as you, expressing as you, living as you. You are not a creation separate from the Creator, waiting to be saved or judged or redeemed. You are the Creator's self-expression, unique, necessary, already complete. Your body is the temple, not because it contains God, but because it is the movement of God. Your mind is the altar, not where you sacrifice to gain favor, but where you recognize the divine nature already present. Your life is the prayer, not words spoken to convince an external power, but the sacred unfolding of principle expressing itself as form, as experience, as this unrepeatable miracle called you. There is no distance to cross, no ritual to perform to earn what is already yours, no penance to pay for being human. You are, right now in this moment,
exactly where the divine dwells. Not because you've become holy enough, because you never stopped being holy. This is the liberation Fox pointed to. Not a liberation that comes from believing the right doctrine or joining the right church or performing the right prayers, but liberation that comes from seeing clearly, from recognizing that the presence you sought in the heavens was always in the heart, from understanding that God is not a being you relate to, but the being you are. And here is the great paradox. When you stop trying to reach God, you discover you are already there. When you stop trying to please God, you find that God's nature is already pleased because God is love, and love doesn't need to be earned. When you stop fearing God's judgment, you realize that divine law doesn't condemn. It simply reflects back to you the consciousness you embody. You are not a sinner in need of salvation. You are the divine in human form, awakening to what you've always been. You are not separated from the source. You are the source, expressing itself as this particular, precious, irreplaceable point of awareness. And everything you've sought, peace, love, wholeness, abundance, purpose, is already present, already available, already flowing through you, as you, for you. You just have to stop looking away. If something awakened in you today, if something old and sleeping stirred back to life, don't let it fade into the noise of your forgetting. Feed it, speak it, live it. Leave your truth in the space below, not for validation, but for remembrance. Because every time you speak what your soul knows, you make it easier for another soul to remember. Share this with someone who's been searching, not to convince them, but to remind them. Because truth doesn't need to be sold. It only needs to be recognized. And when it is recognized, it changes everything. The greatest lie about God is over. You know the truth now, not because I told you, but because something in you remembered. And that something is God.